do marriage preparation. The real reason they do it is they just love being around young lovers like yourselves, because it reminds us about why we got married. It also reminds me why I never liked playing rugby against New Zealanders. Because I used to be a winger and I used to be quick, and when a small, fast-moving object hits a large, immovable object, the law, not the rule, but the law says who comes off second best. So I know you said no rugby jokes, but I had to get one in. Okay. Thank you very much.
So we're into our last session with you, us with you. You've got another session tomorrow, of course. There's a few handouts on your tables there. You might want to just take a minute now to shuffle those around. There's a handout like this. There's also a coupon code and inquiry form. We'll explain those in just a minute.
So we're going to talk about the way of mercy to finish off the conversation that we started this morning. The conversation before lunch reminded us how much we need mercy. So what are some of the ways to mercy? Again, like the last session, we're going to give you something that's both something that we think will be helpful in your work, but also something that you can actually take into your own life. And we're going to unpack the forgiveness exercise that we use through our breakthrough workshop, which is a small 3-hour workshop that we do with married people, but not necessarily married couples, as we try to give them a circuit breaker when they're in stress. And the heart of it is basically an exercise in forgiveness. And what we're going to unpack here is not that exercise itself, but just the nature of it.
So everybody has someone to forgive, all of us. Resentments and emotional wounds can destroy the love and joy in a marriage. But we also know that forgiving is not always easy. Yeah, our Lord Jesus, told us repeatedly in the Gospels that we need to forgive. We need to forgive 70 times 7. That this constant call in the Gospels to forgive, and so we can kind of intellectually know that it's good for us to forgive, and that it's part of the requirements in terms of expressing our faith and being a follower of Jesus. But it's not always easy. So even if we make this decision intellectually, it's like, how do we actually make it so that it's felt within the heart? What's the emotional experience of forgiveness like? So over many years, we've been kind of reflecting on this, and this little activity that we want to explain to you a little bit more has come, I guess, from those sort of years of just wrestling with this whole thing of, I intellectually know I need to forgive, and I want to forgive, but I don't feel like I have forgiven.
Just as we talk about forgiveness, just as a reference point, most of you probably know this, but it's always a good reminder. Forgiveness is completely different from saying I'm sorry. I say I'm sorry, I've made a statement, and I'm assuming it's an honest statement, but I put it out there, and it requires no response. I've done it. I've said I'm sorry. When you seek forgiveness, you completely give the other person power over you. Seeking forgiveness is an act of vulnerability because it requires a response. So we know that with the Lord, when we ask for forgiveness, we know we'll have it. There are many times we won't ask for it, but there's never a question, will God forgive us? But in human terms, it's much more scary to ask for forgiveness. It's also hard to grant forgiveness. And so if you want to be in a relationship where you can forgive each other, it's more important to seek. It's important to find the courage to ask for forgiveness or to seek forgiveness, but it's actually more valuable to learn how to forgive. And that's what this exercise is, or this subject's about.
So why is forgiveness important? Well, there's lots of different impacts, relational impacts, that result from our failure to forgive. There's emotional pain, relationship stagnation, health impacts, misery, inflicting harm on others. In fact, in the kind of formation that we received, which was primarily through Father Chuck Gallagher, a Jesuit, it was sort of very immersed in the Ignatian spirituality, very deeply embedded in us, with this idea that we sin out of our woundedness. And if we're holding on to wounds, if we haven't processed those wounds and forgiven the person who inflicted them on us, it leads us into sin. I mean, we can still have free will, we can still act in opposition, but it's really hard work. You've got to constantly act against the kind of your natural impulse. When we're wounded, that's our impulse is to hit out at others. And so it takes extraordinary self-discipline to curtail that and still hold on to our if we haven't forgiven those wounds. Does that make sense? If you heal the wounds, loving is a whole lot easier.
We also, I think, if you go back to our previous session, where we talked about the apathy as the male response to hurt and anger, the female response, quite often our sinfulness isn't a direct action on the other, it's an absence of action. And so when we're hurt, we can either lash out, or in a loving relationship, more typically what we do is withdraw, particularly as for the men. So again, whenever we're not forgiving, we are staying in a state of hurt, and when you're in a state of hurt, you can't be the whole person for the other person. So there are no good comes from a relationship where forgiveness is required between the parties and it hasn't been sought or it hasn't been granted. No good can come from that dynamic. It's not saying the relationship's bad, but that dynamic is never good. It's only damaging to the relationship. But in every day, in some way, we're all living in that dynamic. At some level, even on our best days, there are things that are unresolved, unforgiven, and forgiveness not sought for. I think one of the great lines about forgiveness... Yeah, go.
Forgiveness is also important for us personally and individually. It's not just the relational impact we need to take into account. The personal impact is that it dampens our joy, is that it instills in us a kind of pessimism. A failure to forgive over years, and many of us have accumulated wounds that we haven't forgiven from decades ago. It's almost like a personality change that can come over us gradually, where we just view the world through grey-coloured glasses. Everything seems gloomy, and there's a pessimism that kind of comes into it, a cynicism that sort of enters into our spirit. And I love this quote. I don't know where it comes from. We came across it somewhere. But a lack of forgiveness, failure to forgive, is like taking poison and expecting the other person to get sick. We kind of think that other person doesn't deserve to be forgiven because what they did to me was so bad, and so we hold on to our resentment against them. But that's kind of like taking poison, thinking they're going to get sick. Well, I'm the one who's getting sick from that poison, right? So we really want to kind of... Unforgiveness is like a toxic impact on us spiritually. So, we want to put that out there as, do this. You need to face into your lack of forgiveness for the sake of your relationship, but also for the sake of your own spiritual and mental health.
We, on our marriage seminar, we look at the topic of family of origin, family formation, where you got your beliefs from. And I remember sitting with a husband once at the end of that exercise where he was really stuck, because we invite the couples then to literally forgive their parents for a hurt they carry in their relationship today. And again, it's not a blame exercise, right? It's not that the parents did something. The parents just might have not have done something, or it might have been their experience of their loving parents in their circumstances. But this man, who'd been married for many years and had his own family, was unable to forgive his father for the deep hurt. And it was serious hurt. It was violent, it was abusive. And he was, unpacking, and he was really stuck with it. So we were sitting there talking over coffee, and he was unpacking this, and, how do you help somebody move on like that? Because it's so profound. And he was saying, look, I can't forgive him, I can't move on. And the irony here is his father's dead. So there's no human reconciliation possible. So you sit there and you suddenly realise the only person suffering in this relationship, in this lack of forgiveness, is this guy. And then I had the wit, which is the Holy Spirit, to ask him, who do you think is feeling the impact of that hurt most in your life right now? And he sat and he thought about it. He said, my wife. So the question then was his question. I didn't have to say it. Will I forgive my father for the sake of my wife? So he wasn't ready to do it for himself, but he was prepared to do it for the relationship. We carry these hurts along, and we think We can't let them go, but we can. But sometimes we need the motivation to do it. And if it's not for ourselves, it's for each other.
Here's a couple of quotes on forgiveness that I think are kind of helpful. There we go. A conscious, deliberate decision to release feelings of resentment or vengeance towards a person or group who has harmed you, regardless of whether they actually deserve your forgiveness. We have to remember that forgiveness is not primarily something we do for the other person. It's actually something we need to do for ourselves and for those that we love within our relationship.
You know, you see these terrible things that happen, somebody's daughter's been murdered or something like that, and you see the parents outside the courtroom saying, I forgive my daughter's murderer. And you think, oh, that's such a generous act. And it is. But actually, it's a terribly whole act for that own person's well-being. That they can, I don't know how you come to that, but that's something that brings a wholeness to that person that everybody would yearn. So we are better people for granting for forgiveness. It's not something we just do for generosity for the other party.
Here's another one. The ability to make peace with the word no. That is, we didn't get what we wanted, expected or needed. I think this applies particularly when we're talking about sort of intimate relationships. The essence of forgiveness is the resilience when things don't go the way we want. So often I carry around resentment against Byron because I really wanted or expected him to do this certain thing or behave this certain way. And so forgiveness, that maturing in spirituality, for me, it really resonates with this quote. It's about coming to peace with the fact that he isn't my puppet that just does everything I want him to do. That I have to be at peace with the fact that he's his own person and that he's going to make choices that maybe isn't exactly what I really wanted at this time.
One of the important things we need to understand about forgiveness is that it's actually not the same as forgetting. Many people, to forgive is to forget. I mean, and in a certain level there is, you release the resentment, but it doesn't mean you deny what happened. And a lot of us cling on to our preparedness not to grant for forgiveness because we don't feel the action was just. And we believe that, by doing so, we condone or we have to forget the action. And you don't. It happened. It hurt. It was real. But from that pain, we can still take a willful act to release ourselves from the resentment. So it's not denying the act. And it's important that, particularly when it's deep hurt, it's not denying that it happened or pretending it didn't happen or saying it didn't matter. Oh, it's fine, it didn't matter. Of course it mattered. So the trick of this is to actually recognise that it's not asking us, forgiveness is not asking us to forget that it happened or to deny that it happened or pretend that it didn't matter.
It's also not the same as reconciliation or as trust in the other person again. We've done this workshop with lots of different groups and different people, and one of the questions always comes up and says, well, what about if, you're talking about a woman whose husband has been abusive and they're separated? Are you saying she's got to go back to him? And we're saying, no, we're not saying that at all. Forgiveness is a separate, independent step to the decision about reconciliation or trust in the individual. Forgiveness stands on its own, and it's as much about restoring your own spiritual and mental health as it is about, actually it's more about your own spiritual and mental health than it is about the individual. That's the next step. You can't have reconciliation without forgiveness, but reconciliation doesn't have to follow from forgiveness. And in some circumstances, reconciliation might not be possible or wise.
And in the case of that husband I spoke about, he couldn't. His father had passed away. There was no reconciliation to be done. All that was left to be done was forgiveness. So again, they are separate steps. And I think the key one for Francine, as Francine's hit the nail on the head there, is that you can't have reconciliation either between each other or between somebody else until you've reached a state of forgiveness yourself. Quite often we want the other person to come and apologise, and through the reconciliation process we will be prepared to forgive. That's a very difficult process to step through. It can be done that way, but that's a tough gig. Much better that we have a heart of forgiveness and we approach the reconciliation, and particularly between each other. Let's just keep this between married couples. If I can bring myself to forgive Francine, then the reconciliation will naturally follow because we love each other. But if I'm waiting for an apology and then we're going to talk about it, and then eventually if I think it's, sound and safe, etc., I forgive you, it's actually putting a lot of loading on something actually I should be doing myself first. And if we both walk into it that way, and with that mindset and with that lack of preparation, the chances of it actually occurring are very low.
Here we go, St. Paul. Spirit is wills it, but the mind and the emotions resist it. The head can be convinced with the theory, but how do we get the heart to agree? So this is where we come up with this little process. And if you wouldn't mind opening up that handout, we'll explain to you what we do, and then we're going to play. We've got a video that we play in our breakthrough workshop. Some of you from Christchurch will have already seen this, but we visited it a few years ago. But anyway, it's a good video. You can see it.
Let me just explain, though, the context of which this is done in. We have people come to a 3-hour seminar, so not a lot of time, and they come maybe as a couple, but they don't have to, and we do no couple work with them. So there's no dialogue, no talking, it's a very strange thing for us to do as a couple thing. But we're focusing on basically, it's called breakthrough because we're trying to get a breakthrough in us when they are stuck.
And the workshop actually came about because of the repeated requests we had, mostly over the phone, of individual spouses who really wanted to come to our marriage seminar and they couldn't convince their spouse to come. And those relationships were in desperate situations and they was kind of crying out for something, and there was nothing that we could refer them to apart from individual counselling. So it was really a response to those needs. The workshop is 3 hours, as Byron said, and they come. Most participants have come as couples, but they don't work as a couple. They work independently.
And so what we get them to do, what we give them is basically some simple material for about an hour, which basically gives 2 bits of insight. One is that arguments and hurt.
Arguments like we did this morning.
Yeah, we normalise arguments because most people catastrophise arguments. We have an argument, our marriage is over. I've got a cold, I'm going to die of cancer. And quite seriously, we have couples come and see us. We're not trained counsellors, but can we come and talk to you? And they tell us the terrible state they're in, and they think this is their last chance, and they're going to separate. And they walk out of our living room, we look at each other and think, my God, they're just like us. Seriously, they've lost hope. They've catastrophised something that's normal and that's hopeless for them. So what we do with them is we normalise the fact that as couples we will have disagreements, arguments, and we will be hurt. So your state is normal, and then the question is, what do you do about it? We give them some simple instruction, just like we did then, about the nature of forgiveness, and then we put them into a simple, personal, individual process, and this is what you're about to see.
So the breakthrough process, there we go. The first step is, so we get them to identify the injury, name the emotions. So this is a cut down version of the handout that they get. So the first part of that is we take them through a process to look at the symptoms of their emotional injuries. And you can see them there: distancing, assigning motive, growing the wound, etc., becoming angry, apathy, cynicism, taking it out on others. So that's just helping them to recognise and own the fact that they have an injury. Because a lot of people will say, I'm not hurt. It's because they've stuffed it down so far, they can't see it, or they think they can't see it or feel it. But
they need to change. She needs to change, but I'm not hurt.
And so that helps them, okay, if I've got those symptoms, that's telling me there is an injury there somewhere. And we help them to then get in touch with the softer emotions associated with it. Because what we all do when we're in pain is it's sort of like the callus that builds up, when you've got something that rubs your skin, eventually you get a callus on it, the skin toughens up so that it doesn't hurt so much anymore. And those are the hard emotions like anger. It's a sort of a defensive reaction. We get angry, we can kind of avoid feeling the really painful, softer emotions like, I'm just really desperately hurt, or I'm really sad, or I'm feeling really vulnerable. So we get angry instead because we feel more empowered with anger. Right? Anger is a superficial emotion in the sense that I like to call it a conditioned response, a defence reaction. The same as our apathy is when we say, oh, well, I don't care. Anybody who says, well, I don't really care, actually they do care, but it's too painful for them to feel the frustration of that need that's not being met. Does that kind of make sense? We sort of get these kind of hard emotions that we sort of put up to protect us from feeling the deeper, softer, more uncomfortable emotions. So the first part of the activity under activity 2 there is to reflect a little bit on what happened, how they felt then, how they feel now, and just get in touch with some of those emotions. And then the main part of the activity...
And so just as a reminder of all good process with couples is it starts with the individual. Know thyself. If you haven't known thyself, you've got nothing worth saying to the other person. It's the refrain I keep using. Too often we engage our mouths before we engage our brains or our hearts. And we do it all the time as married couples. So the first part of this exercise is to slow them down and let them go into their pain. Into their pain below the surface reaction, into what's really happening. And they can name what happened and how am I feeling about it now. And you just let them reflect into that space. Just sit quietly in that space and own it. You don't have to do anything yet, just own it.
And then on the next page over there where it's got the list, is they just start writing in a stream of consciousness. I forgive you, and then the name of their spouse. And then just in a stream of consciousness, whatever objection comes into their head. So the idea of writing is really important because when we write, it helps us process what is happening much more thoroughly and deeply. By putting it externally onto paper, it's almost like having that conversation that it's, again, externalising it from within us. So it's an important part of the process. It's almost like doing self-therapy. It's very powerful. So it might go something like, I forgive you, Byron, but you don't deserve it. I forgive you, Byron, but gee, you really hurt me. I forgive you, Byron, but you're a jerk. I forgive you, Byron, but I'm never going to trust you again. Or I forgive you. You just keep going. Whatever comes back at you, you just write it straight down.
So they're actually invited to go through a process where they say the word I forgive you, and then they write the protest that is in their heart. And we let them keep protesting.
Guys, see, there's 2 pages. Keep going, right?
Keep going until
there's no pushback.
There's no protest left. You've said it all. Now, I liken this with wrestling with God. You don't wrestle with God to win, but we wrestle with God to lose. And this is what you're actually doing. You're wrestling with your pain here, not to beat it, but to give it over. And one of the problems with our pain is that it's never heard. And the reasons for not forgiving are never being asked. So we let them go into their hurt, and then we invite them just to keep going at this and give yourself every reason why it's irrational and not normal in human terms to grant forgiveness. And then when you run out of things to say, stop and sit with that at that point. Because effectively, even though we don't even put it in these terms, this is a form of reflective prayer. Because who's listening in on this while they're doing it?
It's all done in the context of prayer.
It's all done in the context of their prayer, but it's them and God. And they're basically speaking whether they realise it super consciously or not. And they're not doing it in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, but all these sort of acts are prayerful acts. They are effectively unloading to God the human weakness, the human reasons why they can't grant forgiveness until God has heard it all. And there's something that happens through this process. You can say it's magical, you can say it's good psychology, you can say it's spiritual intervention. But through this process, it's not a healing in the sense of everything's fixed, but they are taken through to a point where their protest is complete. And what they are left with is, I forgive you.
And they'll find, I've personally used this process many, many times in lots of different contexts and relationships, not just for Byron.
But she has books of those ones. Yeah, it's usually 1 volume per act.
But I can tell you that it's very, very powerful. It absolutely works. And in the last year or two, we've been giving talks in clergy conferences and different settings, marriage educators and so on. And look, absolutely, please take this process and use it. Use it in your own life. Teach it to other people. This is so liberating and so powerful. We've had wonderful feedback from people who've been doing this. There's a military chaplain who excitedly fed back to us. He came to the set 2 of our workshops actually on this, and he'd been using it with his military personnel. And in one case, he said, "I had 3 women who were at each other's throats, and they were being tasked. They had to go away and do some intensive training together." And he said the relationship was completely dysfunctional. It was just going to be a disaster. And I think their commander had sent them in, go talk to the chaplain, to the padre, as they call them. And he sort of sat them down and he gave them this activity to do, and they got right into it. And they were able to kind of forgive each other. And one of them finished and said, "I have to do this now for my father." And she sat straight back down again, did it a second time, focusing on the forgiveness of the father. I said, transformed their relationship. Said, yes, one of them was a bit dysfunctional and problematic, but the other 2 were able to come to peace with that and manage it. They went off and did their training and actually accomplished what they needed to do.
So this is something like all good tools. There is no reason why neither of us could do this individually when we are struggling with granting forgiveness on something. And you know what's so fantastic about this stuff? The other person doesn't even have to know you're doing it. See, so much marriage stuff requires us to sit down together and, participate and write and talk, etc. And that's good and valuable, and we're right in the middle of all that stuff. But it only takes one person to change the dance. And when a relationship is stuck, and this is the promise we can make to people, is we can't fix your marriage in 3 hours, but we can change your dance. And we change the dance by changing you. And the best way we can change you is take you into the thing that you most feel hurt about, the thing that's holding you back the most, and helping you grant forgiveness on that. And I don't need to know what it is. We do not speak to any one of these couples about what it is. We simply invite them into this. And it's amazing. Good people who are trying to find a way through it will actually, more often than not, get their way through it if we can just equip them with a way through it. They don't need to know the psychology of it. They don't need to be trained in all the ins and outs of it. They can just be walked up to it. And usually there's a great hunger to do something like this. So you think you'd get lots of resistance and protests from the room. We don't. What we get is people who just sit there quietly working their way through this. And you can see some people sitting there struggling with it a little bit. You can see some people sitting there quietly in tears. But you never judge where they are with it, because each of them are actually tackling it in their own way. Now,
do we want to do the...
Yeah, I just want to show you, there's a bit of a process trick here. You just think about, this is now back into a teaching of a process and a technique. One of the things where you've got a short period of time and you're actually trying to move people into a position where they're ready to do that exercise we just did. That's a big task. And so one of the questions is, how do we get them into a personal space? Now, we have been doing this work for 30 years, actually, we've been doing this work, and we're very competent speakers, sometimes better than others. What we've actually learned is we should speak less and use new technology a lot more. The advertising industry worked out many years ago that they could change your behaviour in 30 seconds if they got the imagery right, the messaging right, and the music right. And so what we do before we send them into that reflective exercise, we play them about an 8-minute video. We're going to show it to you now. Some of you have seen it. But it helps set them into the right frame to actually do the exercise. And we show it to you for 2 reasons. One is because we think it gives you a sense of how that process works. But secondly, I think it gives us a broader sense as a group of educators. And we found this a great challenge, which is how we are clinging too often to our old techniques and not really adapting some of the tools that are in front of us today, because we're very comfortable with the old techniques. So let's roll the video and make a few closing comments afterwards.
Nathan, I'll let you move it on for us and play it. Thank you.
One of the biggest mistakes we all make is thinking that time will heal. When we're emotionally injured, time does not heal. Time gets us used to the pain. We become adapted to living with it. We learn how to function with it, but the pain remains.
Common reaction when we're hurt is to withdraw. We pull back from the one who hurt us and put distance between us. But in a marriage, it can be really destructive. We just drifted apart.
At first we'd make up and it'd be good for a few days. But then we're back into an argument again.
Resentment is a lack of forgiveness, and unhealed wounds breed it. The thing is, love and joy simply cannot coexist with resentment.
I'd say I'm sorry and I thought it was behind us, but things were still tense. Some days we'd hardly speak 2 words to each other.
Resentment looks for justification. We look for confirmation that our resentment is reasonable and justified, so we look for the bad in the person.
At first, I was sympathetic, like he's under pressure at work. But I started to feel really angry. Like I didn't deserve this. I had this desire to be vindicated. I hated who I had become. Nasty, nitpicky, petty, and grumpy all the time. I was driving him away and hurting my kids too.
This definitely wasn't what I thought I was signing up for. I could barely speak with her without feeling like I was about to explode. She blamed me for everything wrong in our marriage, and that was so unfair. I was trying, I really was. I used to be able to make her happy. Now it seemed like everything I did was wrong. If I bought her flowers or I tried to be romantic, she'd brush me off. It really wore me down.
I realized that I'd pretty much been angry with him continuously for the last year.
A lot of people resist forgiveness because they think it means condoning what happened or saying that it didn't matter.
But forgiveness is not actually forgetting. What it does do is it transforms the memory so that it no longer has the power to keep us in bondage.
It got really old.
Forgiveness is a choice to let go of our desire for retribution, letting go of our need to have them pay for what they did.
Forgiveness is not the same as trusting the other person. It allows us to make the decision about trust without the compulsive, overwhelming fear of being betrayed again. So you can make decisions from a position of strength and serenity rather than a position of fear.
Forgiveness allows us to remember the wound without the pain of the wound overwhelming us. It's the only way to break the power of resentment.
I decided I didn't need to have him understand. This was about me. It wasn't eating him up inside. It was eating at me. But what would it take to fix me?
Forgiveness brings freedom, the freedom to be who we really are, the freedom to love and move and be in a relationship without the crippling fear and anxiety.
It wasn't easy, but I knew I had to push past my pride. I had to become accountable. I had to forgive.
Forgiveness allows us to bring our best self to our relationships.
It makes healing possible.
I chose not to analyze every word and misinterpret his intentions during our conversations. I started to notice the little changes. The kids were even less anxious and clean. I wasn't trapped by my resentment anymore.
Ask any long-time married couple and they will tell you that forgiveness is crucial.
You can stay together as a couple without forgiveness, but you're going to be miserable together. It's not what you want. It's not what God wants either.
And it leaves your marriage in a very vulnerable state.
Maybe someday we will talk about it. and he will understand. I haven't forgotten, but my behavior has shifted. And I'm a better person for it.
Jesus commands us to forgive, and like all his commandments, it's not meant to be a burden. His command brings us freedom and joy. Think about Christ on the cross. Even as he's being tortured and crucified, he chooses to forgive his tormentors.
If it seems impossible to forgive, that it's just too big to do on your own, that's especially when you need the power of Jesus to help.
I realised that nothing was going to change unless I changed. I had to make the start by forgiving her and letting go of my case against her. I knew it wouldn't make everything perfect, but it was the right thing to do. For myself, for my marriage, for my wife. I can't say it was easy. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, actually.
Resentment is a choice for stagnation and darkness. Forgiveness is a choice for life and growth. The question is, what do you choose?
They go, just again from a process explanation, they go from that video into that exercise. So rather than hearing somebody giving instructions, they just get the instructions beforehand, and then we play the video and we let them sit there for at least half an hour just doing that exercise. And then with that exercise, there is no requirement for them to do anything with that. We don't send them home to their, we don't ask them to share it with each other, we don't send them home to go and read it to the other person, we've got help with them that. We literally just leave it with them, for them to do what they need to do with it. And that's the closing of the seminar. So we offer that up for something as a tool for our own relationship. Each of us need to do that exercise, frankly, every day. But if we did it once a week, or we did it once a month, if we thought about our date nights, which has now become a bit of our lexicon, we say, let's have a date night. How do we prepare for our last date night? What a great way to prepare for a date night. How do we bring something like this into our life, in addition to those two other examples we gave you beforehand, which was the Connect Kiss or Cuddle, and the sharing my strongest feelings. Here's another tool that we can use in our relationships. But also, here's a very simple tool, which you don't need a video for and you don't need a course for, but you could explain to somebody as an individual how to help them deal with a great hurt that they are struggling to grant forgiveness over.
You don't even need the handout. You can just give them a blank piece of paper and draw a line down the side, saying, in this column write, I forgive you, and then your spouse's name, and then on that side write whatever your resistance is.
Because in the relationship we have as husband and wife, we talk about it in the context today of radical demand. And it is. Marriage, true marriage as we know, a sacramental marriage. The demand of the vow I gave to love Francine as best as humanly possible, as when she went to her grave, that her greatest experience of God's unconditional love is by the way I loved her, is a radical demand. And I cannot but fail to do that well. But my vocation is to do it as best as humanly possible for me. That's a radical demand, and with that comes extravagant mercy. And the gift of extravagant mercy comes from each other in the relationship. And if we don't have tools for extravagant mercy, it becomes a radical demand again without a mechanism of actually helping us do it. And so we've started to search for really practical tools that help us, live the call of mercy, which our current Pope has called for. Not in the general sense of mercy, but in the sense of mercy with each other. And this is one of the best, the simplest ones. There are others, but this is one of the most simplest ones we've found.
So that video is available free on our website. If you go to smartloving.org/breakthrough, that video is there. So if you want to share it with anybody, you can send them there. It's on our Facebook page. I think we've got it up on our YouTube channel. It's available for your use in your work, or even just with your relationships and friendships and family and so on. We've also put the whole workshop into an online course, and there's a coupon on your desk, on your things there that looks like that. We've got a 75% discount for you if you want to get access to that. You get, there's about 5 other videos similar in quality to that one that goes through the unpacking of arguments and so on. You're most welcome to take advantage of that. We've also added into that coupon code, you can use the same code if you want to get access to our sponsor course, which is the same course that we have for our online engaged couples, but it doesn't have all the progression logs and the time logs and the assessment built into it. So the engaged couples do the same curriculum but in a version of the course that makes sure they actually participate in it and does all the quizzes and so on. They get a certificate at the end. The sponsor version just has all of those things removed so that you can kind of, jump around a little bit. And so if you want to have a look, you can also add that into, use the same coupon code to discount that right down as well. And the other thing I've put there is just an inquiry form. We have some free newsletters and things like that. If you're interested in receiving those, you can sign up on our websites, unsubscribe at any time obviously, or if you prefer, you can just give us your details and we will add you in. You'll get an email that will ask you to confirm that you do want to go onto that subscription list. Somebody's also asked us about getting the slides, so we will just clean up our files a little bit because we've jumped around and picked up a few typos and things, but we will also make those available to you. What's the best way? If we just forward that to the organisers, you could forward those on.
And if you give us your email address, we'll send it to you as well.
We'll send it to you as well. And I think that's it.
Yeah, I was just going to make just one closing comment on the work, more on the work that we do rather than particular content, etc. As we've been reflecting on the work we've been doing for 29 years now in marriage formation, we're interested in taking Pope Francis's accompaniment challenge into both helping couples understand how they walk an accompaniment journey, as well as into the way we think about how we accompany couples through their journey. And I think it's not we do it, we've got mentors, we've got all sorts of things like that, but it provides another dimension to how we think about what we do. We think we need to constantly innovate. We're in a world that's innovating faster than us. We grew up in Marriage Encounter, which is a wonderful thing. We've done it ourselves. We've run courses and seminars ourselves. But a lot of what I'm going to call the technology, the processes we use, the weekend retreats, and all those things that we grew up in and we love, because they were our first love, because they were our conversion experience, we get very caught up in thinking that's the way everybody should experience them. One of the sobering but also exciting insights for us was when we first took our marriage prep course into video teaching, which is us to camera, as you can see. We used to give the course with a room of sometimes one couple as a mentoring, or 10 couples in a group. And at the end of the first evening, we would give them a choice. Would you prefer to watch the video, which we're on it, or would you prefer that we actually just presented it to you? What would you like? And I have never, ever had anyone say, not enthusiastically, no, we prefer to watch the video. It's more impactful. It's more engaging. And I'll give you a little hint, as you've observed it up here. When you've got that content, you've honed it and you've tightened it, and you do not ramble, and you do not go off topic. So you deliver it with an additional set of tools that you don't have when you're an open mouth, which is visual imagery and music, which is highly emotive. So I think our challenge for everything that we do is we need to constantly keep innovating. And I don't just mean technologically, but in everything that we're doing. What's the latest relational insight, the latest piece of technology, the latest delivery mechanism can we do to do what's humanly impossible, which is change the world's attitude to marriage? And if there's ever a time that was more needed, it's now. So thank you for having us here. It's been
questions. We've got 3 minutes left.
3 minutes for a question, 2 questions. But thank you for having, because we'll run out of time to get cut off. Thank you for having us here. We get a huge supercharge, a bit like we all do from having a great young couple in our midst. We get a supercharge from being with you. We've got a couple of minutes for a question if anyone would like to ask us one.
Otherwise, we'll be back down the back.
Otherwise,
hang around over the rest of the part of the afternoon anyway.
And otherwise, we're going to let you go. So there's a choice.
it falls on me to pass on the immense gratitude from this group. We have really, really enjoyed your sharing with us, and to think that you have given your 30 years of marriage, congratulations for that this year. I'm
an incredibly patient man. That just cost me.
No shit. But I mean, you've given us those 30 years of really authentic, gritty experience of your own marriage, and you've shared that very, very openly with us in the times that we have invited you across the ditch to come and share with us here in Christchurch, and we have loved every bit of it. Today has been really, really rich because it's been so authentic, and because you have given us 3 very, very practical tools to be able to, for the male to offload when they come home, as to what is the main emotional encounter they've had that day, and for the female to be able to embrace, the kiss. Those are very, very practical tools, and this one you've just given us from the wonderful breakthrough experience that you brought to us here in Christchurch some years ago, to be able to do this exercise of forgiveness. So we thank you so, so much, and we could just about make you honorary Kiwis with the amount of gifting you've given us. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you.